Why did no one look up when she sat at the table? Not a single head turned when Aurora Hale placed her tray down at the far end of the long steel bench. The mess hall was loud, forks scraping, boots dragging, laughter bouncing off concrete walls, but around her there was a bubble of quiet, the kind that wasn't peaceful, the kind that meant people had already decided who you were before you ever spoke. She sat straight-backed, uniform plain, rank low, no shine, no decoration. Her hair was pulled tight, functional, nothing about her invited attention, and that was exactly why she'd been sent. She'd been awake since before dawn, not because of nerves, because the rain had soaked through her sleeves while a bored guard pretended to check paperwork. 45 minutes she stood outside the gate, 45 minutes watching security lapses, trucks waved through, cameras left unmanned. She logged it all silently. That was how the day began. By the time she reached her assigned quarters, the room was freezing. Someone had ripped the thermostat out. Frost crusted the mattress. It was meant to shake her, to make her complain. Instead, she listened to the hum in the wall, traced the wiring, reset the system with a stripped lamp cord. The temperature rose. She wrote down the boot prints near the vent. Size, wear pattern, owner. No anger, just notes. By mid-morning, the insults were louder. A patch ripped from her shoulder and crushed into mud. Someone laughed. She didn't react. They didn't know the patch wasn't symbolic. They didn't know it held names, lives, losses. She logged that too. By the time she entered the mess hall, she was already exhausted, not physically, but morally. The kind of tired that comes from watching people choose cruelty when professionalism would have been easier. That was when Sergeant Maher dragged his chair close. "You lost, rookie," he said, loud enough to draw a crowd. "This table for operators." Aurora kept eating. It irritated him more than shouting ever could. He nudged her chair. Water spilled. She wiped it up slowly, calmly, as if time itself bent around her. Someone else joined in, then another. Words sharpened, jokes got meaner. A chair leg scraped, a cup tipped. A mess hall worker was tripped for sport. Aurora caught the falling mug before it shattered. She met the young man's eyes, gave him a nod. He stopped shaking. That was when Commander Pierce stepped in. "You don't belong here," he said, voice smooth with authority. "Find another table or another base." The room leaned in. Aurora finally looked up. She didn't rush, didn't raise her voice. She reached into her pocket and placed a small black card on the table. It didn't look important. But when the light on it blinked red, the laughter died. Because silence, real silence, doesn't arrive loudly. It simply settles. And none of them yet understood what they had just triggered. Why did she keep letting it happen? That question haunted the ones who watched her over the next hours. Why didn't she snap? Why didn't she report it? Why didn't she fight back the way they expected? They didn't understand that she was already fighting, just not where they could see it. The physical trials began before sunrise the next day. Shoulder checks, sabotaged gear, a rucksack strap designed to fail. When it snapped, 80 pounds shifted violently. She caught it, held it, kept running. No complaints, no accusations, just breath, cadence, resolve. They tried noise next, jamming her radio during a navigation drill. Music blasted into her headset, laughter from the control booth. She removed the headset and walked by wind and sound alone, finished early. That unsettled them. So they escalated. Water sprayed directly into her face during the crawl. Mud filled her mouth. She kept moving, treated it like weather. In the pool, they tied her limbs and added weight, expected panic. She sank calmly to the bottom and waited. Minutes passed. The laughter stopped. By the time they dove in to save her, she was already surfacing, slow, composed, eyes steady. That was the first crack. Later, a flash device was swapped, a prank meant to mark her as dead. She felt the imbalance mid-throw, adjusted, held the door closed. Blue dye exploded harmlessly inside. She walked out clean. "You build bombs like a child," she whispered, handing the casing back. For the first time, fear replaced mockery. Still they tried. A climbing wall, a blocked handhold, she bypassed it. A water station, her cup knocked away, she ran dehydrated. A cut tourniquet, she used her boot lace instead. They weren't testing toughness anymore. They were testing how far cruelty could go before consequence arrived. And Aurora was letting them find the edge. Because there was something she hadn't told them. Not yet. Why did the room feel smaller once she stopped explaining herself? The briefing room was where it began to unravel. Maps on the wall, data on screens, laughter at her empty file, jokes about her civilian photo, a dog, a neighborhood. They didn't know the house was a safe site. They didn't know the dog's job. They didn't know the file was empty because it couldn't legally exist. She sat quietly as they displayed graphs showing 0 contributions, 0 kills, 0 value. It hurt. Not because it was true, but because some of it had cost lives they would never know. When she finally stood, it wasn't to defend herself. It was to touch the map. 3 strokes of a stylus. 3 exposed flanks. "You're walking 12 people into a kill box," she said evenly. They laughed. Reset the map. Erase the correction. What they didn't erase was the recording, or the fact that she just documented their willingness to ignore a fatal flaw out of pride. That was when the screen changed. Live feed. Text scrolling. Unauthorized access. Locks engaged. Red lights. Panic. Someone shouted. Someone reached for a weapon. No one laughed. Aurora stayed seated. Because the trap only works if the subject stays still. When Chief Var entered, the air left the room. Words like Omega access and presidential authorization don't need explanation. They explain themselves. She stood then. Not taller but heavier. Her presence pressed into the space like gravity. They learned who she was. Who she'd written for. Who she answered to. Who had been watching. The silence that followed wasn't fear. It was shame. Why does dignity feel louder than anger? Ryland knelt. Fiona shook. Apologies came fast, too fast. Aurora didn't accept or reject them. She simply continued. Evidence displayed, theft, fraud, plagiarism, medical violations. Not revenge. Documentation. She stripped a pin from a uniform and placed it on the table. Stolen credit is where I draw the line, she said quietly. No one argued. When the lasers appeared through the window, they understood something deeper. She hadn't been alone. She never was. The bystanders were addressed last. Not with rage, with disappointment. You watched, she said. That was your choice. Elite status revoked. Standards raised. No yelling. No drama. Just consequence. The call from above confirmed it. She ended it without ceremony. Leadership doesn't linger. As she walked out, she turned one portrait backward. That was enough. Outside, the night was cool. The guard who'd left her in the rain saluted. She didn't acknowledge it. Fear isn't respect. The dog charged. Stopped. Recognized her. Authority isn't commanded. It's remembered. Why did she leave without looking back? Because closure isn't something you demand. It's something you outgrow. The helicopter waited. The mission continued. As she boarded, the base behind her felt smaller than it ever had. Ryland sat alone inside, career dismantled not by force, but by exposure. Aurora didn't hate him. She didn't pity him. She simply understood him. And understanding is often the sharpest end. As the aircraft lifted into the dark, she finally exhaled. Not relief. Resolve. Because strength doesn't announce itself. It endures. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the pressure increase the moment the sun came up? Aurora felt it before anyone said a word. The air on the training field had a different weight that morning, thicker, sharper, like a storm waiting for permission to break. Boots hit the dirt in uneven rhythm as the unit gathered, stretching, joking, sizing each other up. She stood among them in plain gear, nothing announcing her presence except her stillness. Stillness, she had learned, unsettled people more than confidence ever could. The first run started without ceremony. No countdown, no warning, just a sharp whistle and a surge of bodies pushing forward. Keegan cut across her path immediately, shoulder driving into her with practiced carelessness. Not enough to look intentional, just enough to throw her stride. "Watch your feet," he called back, laughing. She caught herself, adjusted her pace, and kept moving. Her lungs burned lightly, not from effort but from restraint. It would have been easy to match his aggression, easier still to report it, but this wasn't about fairness. It was about pattern recognition. By mile 2, Fiona had positioned herself just ahead, slowing deliberately, forcing Aurora to shorten her stride or waste energy passing. It was subtle, almost clever, the kind of harassment that only existed if you noticed it. "You sure you can keep up?" Fiona murmured, breath barely labored. "You're fatting." Aurora said nothing. She focused on cadence, on the sound of boots behind her, on the way the ground dipped near the tree line where runoff collected after rain. She logged it all. Terrain mattered. Behavior mattered more. At mile 4, the sabotage revealed itself. The left strap of her rucksack gave way with a sharp, tearing snap. 80 pounds shifted violently, dragging her shoulder down and twisting her spine. The pain was immediate, white and precise. Around her, a few heads turned. Someone laughed. Ryland watched from the Jeep, stopwatch dangling from his fingers, eyes narrowed in anticipation. He wanted a quit, a complaint, a reason. Aurora didn't give him one. She caught the weight, swung the pack forward, cradled it against her chest, and increased her pace. Her arms took the load. Her core stabilized. The strain etched itself into her muscles, but her face remained neutral. As she passed the Jeep, their eyes met. His smile faltered. It wasn't defiance that unsettled him. It was competence without acknowledgement. The communications drill followed. Radios crackled to life. Coordinates were issued. Vance's voice came through her headset, then music. Loud, distorted, mocking. She listened for 3 seconds. That was enough. Aurora turned the radio off. The field became quiet in a different way. Wind brushed the tall grass. Gravel shifted under distant boots. She adjusted her route by sound alone, counting steps, feeling the slope of the land through the soles of her boots. She arrived at the marker early, planted the flag, and waited. In the control booth, Vance stared at the screen, still blasting music into a frequency no one occupied. Confusion replaced amusement. The obstacle course was worse. Mud crawl, barbed wire low enough to punish hesitation. She dropped to her stomach and began moving. That was when the hoses turned on her. High-pressure streams hit her face directly, filling her mouth, forcing water into her nose. Mud churned into a slurry that clung to skin and cloth. Someone shouted encouragement that sounded a lot like laughter. Aurora didn't stop. She cleared her airway with a controlled exhale and continued forward, elbows digging in, body moving with mechanical patience. Pain existed. Panic did not. She treated it like weather, unpleasant, temporary, irrelevant. By the time she cleared the wire, the hoses shut off. No one cheered. The pool waited next. Hands tied, feet bound, drown-proofing was standard. The weight belt was not. It landed on her chest with a dull thud as she bobbed at the surface. 40 pounds, enough to force a decision. The deck filled with eyes. Aurora inhaled once, deep, measured. Then she sank. The bottom of the pool was quiet, blue, familiar. She settled into stillness, slowing her heart with practiced control. Seconds stretched, then minutes. The laughter above faded, replaced by murmurs, then by shouting. When she surfaced, it was unhurried. Water slid from her face as she pushed the belt away and untied herself with her toes. She met Keegan's stare across the pool. He looked afraid. The live fire simulation came next. She felt it the moment she lifted the flash device, too light, unbalanced. Her fingers adjusted, her mind recalculated. She held the door. The blue dye burst harmlessly inside. She entered clean, retrieved the casing, and handed it back. "You rushed the fuse," she said quietly. "That's how people get killed." No one laughed after that. At the climbing wall, Ryland tried subtlety, a boot blocking a final handhold, a test of desperation. Aurora shifted momentum, bypassed the obstruction, and pulled herself over with a grip that shouldn't have held. She landed behind him without a sound. He didn't turn around right away. At the hydration station, her cup disappeared. Fiona's smirk lingered. Aurora ran without water. Her body adapted, focus sharpened, the world narrowed to essentials. During the medical drill, the tourniquet snapped as expected. She didn't hesitate. Her boot came off, laces stripped. A makeshift windlass formed in seconds, the dummy stabilized. She pointed to the broken equipment. "Supply issue," she said. It sounded neutral. It was. The navigation phase was the last insult of the morning. A GPS unit wiped clean, coordinates leading into restricted swamp. Ryland's mock salute lingered. Aurora turned the device off immediately. She navigated by sun angle, moss growth, terrain memory. When she reached extraction early, she waited, watched the tracker as Ryland's team wandered into trouble. She didn't smile. The range was quiet. The rifle was. Her first shot confirmed the sabotage. She adjusted mentally and placed every round where it needed to go. By the time the final whistle blew, the field felt different. No cheers, no jokes. Just breathing. The locker room offered no relief. Zip ties, a crude drawing, silence from the others. Aurora cut the ties with a ceramic shard so fast it barely registered. Gasps followed. Her spare uniform smelled wrong, strong, intentional. She wore it anyway. When her phone vibrated, she checked it once. Phase 1 complete. She deleted the message. Her reflection stared back at her from the mirror, not angry, not broken. Watching. Because the hardest part wasn't enduring the cruelty. It was letting them believe it was working. Why did the room feel different once she stopped reacting? The shift wasn't loud. No alarms. No orders barked across the corridor. It was subtler than that, like the moment before a storm when even the wind seems to hold its breath. Aurora sensed it as she walked toward the briefing wing, boots echoing softly against polished concrete. Conversations hushed when she passed, not out of respect, out of uncertainty. They didn't know what to do with someone who didn't push back. The waiting area outside the conference room smelled faintly of disinfectant and burnt coffee. Chairs lined the walls. A muted screen cycled through outdated announcements. Aurora stood instead of sitting, her back against the wall, arms relaxed at her sides. Standing changed perspective. It always had. Fiona arrived first, heels sharp against the floor, confidence draped over her shoulders like a tailored jacket. She slowed when she noticed Aurora standing there, book open in her hands. "A little light reading," Fiona said, reaching out without permission. She snatched the paperback and flipped it once, scoffing. "You know this isn't book club, right?" She tossed it into the trash. Aurora didn't rush. She walked over, retrieved the book, brushed off invisible dust, and reopened it to the same page. Then she looked Fiona in the eye and spoke calmly, in a language Fiona didn't recognize. Ignorance is the loudest voice in the room. Fiona frowned, unsettled by the unfamiliar cadence. What was that? Aurora didn't answer. She returned to her place against the wall and kept reading. That was the moment Fiona stepped back. Inside the briefing room, the air was heavy with anticipation. Maps glowed on the walls. A digital sand table projected the upcoming operation in sterile blues and reds. Ryland stood at the head, posture confident, marker in hand. His people clustered around him, relaxed, familiar, safe. Aurora entered last. Eyes tracked her now, not mocking, not amused, measuring. "Let's address the elephant in the room," Ryland said casually, tapping the screen. "Agent Hale's file." He brought it up deliberately, pages filled with redactions, black bars where information should have been. "Hard to trust someone we can't read," he continued. "Smells like a cover assignment." Laughter followed, thinner than before. Fiona stepped in smoothly. 0 confirmed engagements, 0 leadership roles, 0 operational value. She clicked to a bar graph. Everyone else's contributions towered high. Aurora's column was empty. "An anchor," Fiona said lightly, "dragging us down." Aurora felt it then. Not anger, not humiliation. Grief. Because those empty spaces represented missions that never officially happened, names that could never be spoken, people who existed only in memory now, sacrifices reduced to silence by necessity. She stayed quiet. Ryland wasn't finished. He pulled up a grainy photo. Aurora in civilian clothes, walking a small dog in a suburban street. "Amazing what passes for classified these days," he said. "Looks like a placement op to me, PR optics." The room laughed. Aurora looked at the timestamp. She remembered that day, the safe house, the device hidden under the sidewalk, the 4 men who never made it to sunset. She said nothing. When Ryland told her to clean the sand table, it was meant as humiliation. She approached slowly, but instead of wiping it, she picked up the stylus. 3 strokes. Clean, decisive. "Your left flank collapses here," she said evenly. And here, you funnel your team into overlapping fire." The room froze for half a second. Then Ryland laughed, sharp and dismissive. "Don't touch the strategy." He reset the display. The laughter returned, louder now, relief flooding in. They didn't know the cameras were recording everything. They didn't know she just documented his refusal to correct a fatal flaw. As the mockery peaked, the screen flickered. Once, twice, then the image changed. Live feed. The room they were sitting in, displayed from above. Confusion rippled through the group. Ryland tapped controls. "Glitch," he muttered. Text appeared over the feed. "Unauthorized access detected. User R. Pierce. Clearance insufficient." The doors locked with a deep magnetic thud. The lights shifted to red. Someone stood abruptly. "Is this a drill?" No one answered. Aurora remained seated, hands folded loosely on the table. She felt the moment settle, the exact instant when arrogance gives way to fear. The door opened. Chief Douglas Varr stepped in. The room stilled completely. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Who authorized questioning a superior officer?" he asked quietly. Ryland's face drained. "Superior." Var's gaze slid to Aurora. "Aurora Hale is Omega Access," he said. "Shadow operative, one of 3. Silence pressed down hard enough to hurt. Aurora stood. Not dramatically, just enough. Var continued. "You mocked her empty file. That file requires presidential authorization. She authored Chapter 4 of your Urban Evasion Manual, the encryption protecting this base, her code. He paused, letting it land. You haven't been hazing a rookie. You've been hazing the architect of your own survival. Faces shifted, hands trembled. Vance stared at the table like it might open beneath him. VAR plugged in a drive. Financial records appeared. Commander Pierce, VAR said calmly, you've been skimming funds for 2 years. Ryland dropped to one knee without being told. Fiona gasped when the next document appeared, design schematics she'd claimed as her own. Plagiarism, VAR said, from Agent Hale's work. Fiona's hands shook. Vance tried to speak. VAR raised a hand, sit down. He displayed blood work. Illegal performance enhancers, 6 months, compromised judgment. Vance collapsed back into his chair. Aurora finally spoke. Not loudly. You tore up a report that would have saved 12 lives, she said, stepping forward. A red team breached your perimeter 20 minutes ago. I handled it on the way here. She placed the reprinted report on Ryland's chest. You're relieved of duty for incompetence, she said. The theft just explains the motive. She removed the pin from his uniform and set it on the table. Stolen credit ends careers, she added softly. Lasers appeared on chests. Red dots. Outside the window. Aurora gestured faintly. My team been in position since lunch. No one moved. She turned to the others. You watched, you laughed, that was a choice. She tapped the console. Elite status revoked, standards raised. No one protested. The phone rang. A familiar voice filled the room. Agent Hale, assets secured. Yes, General, she replied. The cancer's removed. She ended the call. As she walked out, the room stayed silent. Because the truth had finally arrived. And it didn't need to shout. Why did no one follow her when she walked out? The corridor beyond the briefing room felt longer than it had minutes earlier. The walls hadn't changed. The lights hadn't dimmed. And yet the air carried a different weight, like the aftershock of something irreversible. Aurora moved through it without haste, boots striking softly, each step measured. Behind her, no one spoke. No one tried to stop her. Power doesn't always announce itself in the moment it arrives. Sometimes it's only recognized when it leaves. She paused at the portrait wall. Frames of past commanders stared out in polished confidence. Medals. Smiles rehearsed for history. Aurora stopped in front of Ryland's photograph. She studied it briefly, not with anger, not even with satisfaction, but with the detached curiosity of someone examining a failed structure. She lifted the frame and turned it to face the wall. No ceremony, no destruction. A corporal passing by slowed, eyes widening, then continued on without a word. He understood what that gesture meant. Rank had just become irrelevant. Outside, the night air was cool and clean. The base hummed with distant machinery and the low whine of generators. Aurora crossed the tarmac, her shadow stretching long under the floodlights. The guard at the gate, the same one who had left her in the rain, snapped to attention so hard his heels clicked together. His salute shook. Aurora didn't return it. Fear isn't respect, and respect born of fear doesn't last. She was halfway across the open space when Ryland stumbled out behind her. Hale, he shouted, voice cracking, you don't understand. He stopped himself, breath ragged, grasping for authority that no longer recognized him. Then he did the one thing desperation always does. He whistled. The sound cut sharp through the night. From behind a maintenance shed, Titan emerged. The Belgian Malinois moved like a missile, muscles coiled, eyes locked. A dog trained to obey one voice. Ryland's last illusion of control. Guard, Ryland screamed. Titan charged. The SEALs watching from the doorway flinched. Someone swore under their breath. This was how it would end, they thought. Blood on concrete. Chaos. Aurora didn't move. She didn't raise her hands. She didn't shift her stance. She simply whistled 3 short notes, soft but precise. Titan skidded to a halt. The dog's ears perked. His posture changed. In an instant, aggression dissolved into recognition. He dropped low, tail wagging once, then crawled forward and pressed his head gently against Aurora's leg. Ryland staggered back. "That's not possible," he whispered. Aurora knelt, resting her hand briefly on the dog's head. "You don't own loyalty," she said quietly. "You inherit it or you earn it." Titan stayed with her. The rotors arrived next. The sound rolled in from the horizon, low and thunderous. Dust lifted from the tarmac as an unmarked helicopter descended, sleek, dark, unbranded. Not base transport, not routine. Spectral division. The doors slid open before it touched down. Operators moved with synchronized efficiency, faces unreadable behind gear that didn't carry names. Captain Evander Cross stepped out first. He didn't look at Ryland. He walked straight to Aurora's side. "Ma'am," he said, voice professional, controlled, "we're ready." The word landed harder than any shouted command. Ryland's mouth opened, then closed again. He recognized Cross. Everyone did, a decorated operator, a peer, or so he'd thought. Cross handed Aurora a tablet. Live satellite imagery flickered across the screen, an operation Ryland had briefed but never truly understood. "Target package is secure," Cross said, "awaiting your go-ahead." Aurora nodded once. Only then did Cross allow himself a fraction of warmth. He stood close, not possessive, not protective, equal, trusted. Few knew the truth. Fewer still understood what it meant. Ryland finally found his voice. You work for her." Cross turned his head slightly. "She led the team that pulled me out of Kandahar," he said. "You're barely qualified to carry her pack." That was the moment Ryland broke. Fiona hovered near the doorway, face pale, trying to disappear into the concrete. Cross's gaze found her too. "And Lieutenant Dree," he added calmly, "that ring you mocked, it's not jewelry. It's a containment unit for a secure data key issued to the highest level of command. You called it cheap." Fiona looked at Aurora's hand and understood the scale of what she'd misjudged. Cross reached for Aurora's palm, turning it upward. A thin white scar cut across it, old, deliberate. His own hand bore the same mark. "We earned these getting out of a collapsed bunker," he said quietly. "Together." There was no romance in the statement, only history. Behind him, the spectral team stood in silent formation. Not intimidation, assurance. Aurora wasn't alone. She never had been. The helicopter's pilot crackled over open comms. "Viper 1 to Ghost Actual. Wheels down, seat ready. White House is standing by." The words sucked the remaining air from the space. Aurora checked her watch. She turned toward the helicopter. Ryland sank into a nearby chair, hands over his face, finally understanding the cost of underestimating someone who never needed to prove herself. Aurora boarded without looking back. The helicopter lifted smoothly, banking into the night. From the ground, the base looked small, contained, insular. She watched it recede, not with triumph but with resolve. Because strength isn't about being seen. It's about being ready. And sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one carrying the heaviest weight. Why did the silence feel heavier once the helicopter disappeared? The sound of the rotors faded into the night, leaving behind a quiet that pressed against the base like a held breath. For those still standing on the tarmac, the world felt oddly hollow, like something essential had been removed without warning. Orders still existed. Ranks still showed on sleeves, but the certainty they'd relied on was gone. Inside the briefing room, no one spoke. Ryland sat slumped in his chair, staring at the floor. The silver star pin lay where it had fallen, catching the overhead light with a dull, accusing shine. No one reached for it. No one even looked at it for long. It felt radioactive now, evidence of something stolen rather than earned. Fiona stood near the wall, arms wrapped around herself, replaying every word she'd said, every laugh she'd joined, every moment she'd chosen comfort over integrity. She'd always believed power looked a certain way, loud, confident, untouchable. She'd never considered that real power might walk past her without making eye contact. Keegan broke the silence first, his voice rough. "What happens now?" No one answered. Because for the first time, they understood that consequences weren't coming from above. They were already inside the room. Hours later, the official orders arrived. They were brief, clinical, unemotional. Temporary suspension of Tier 1 status, mandatory requalification under new command, full internal review pending. The words hit harder than any shouted reprimand ever could. Some men stared at the screens in disbelief. Others looked away, ashamed. A few clenched their fists, not in anger but in fear, fear of failing without someone else to blame. That night, sleep didn't come easily. In the barracks, whispers replaced laughter. Jokes died halfway through sentences. Every clang of metal sounded too loud. Every shadow felt watched. Because they were being watched. Not by Aurora. By themselves. Meanwhile, miles away, Aurora sat strapped into the helicopter's jump seat, helmet resting against the bulkhead. The cabin was dim, lit only by instrument glow and the faint red of night vision reflections. Across from her, Evander reviewed data on his tablet, silent, focused. She closed her eyes, not to rest but to think. The mission ahead was real. Lives depended on it. That was the part that mattered. The rest, the base, the humiliation, the reckoning, already felt distant, necessary but finished. Evander glanced up. "You okay?" She nodded once. "They learned something." "Will it stick?" Aurora considered the question. "For some of them," she said, "pain teaches faster than pride." He gave a small nod. He knew her well enough not to press further. The helicopter touched down at a forward staging site before dawn. No ceremony, no reception, just operators moving with purpose, weapons checked, plans finalized. Aurora stepped into the cold air, the weight of command settling back onto her shoulders like an old, familiar cloak. Here, no one questioned her presence. No one tested her. They trusted her. The operation unfolded the way well-planned operations do, quietly, efficiently, without unnecessary risk. Signals intercepted, movements predicted, targets neutralized with precision rather than spectacle. Aurora moved through it all with the same calm she'd carried into the mess hall days earlier. Because composure wasn't situational. It was structural. When the last objective was secured and the team exfiltrated, she allowed herself a single breath of relief. Not celebration, just acknowledgement. Later, as reports were filed and debriefs concluded, Aurora stood alone for a moment on the edge of the landing zone, watching the horizon lighten with approaching dawn. She thought of the young attendant she'd nodded to in the mess hall, of the corporal who'd looked away at the portrait wall, of the ones who'd laughed because it was easier than standing up. Change wouldn't come all at once. It never did. But it had begun. Back at the base, the requalification started immediately. The standards were brutal, not physically impossible, but mentally unforgiving. Discipline enforced without favoritism. Mistakes addressed without cruelty. Leadership evaluated not by confidence but by responsibility. Some failed. A few quit. Others adapted. Keegan struggled the most. Without an easy target, his aggression turned inward. He found himself correcting his own behavior mid-sentence, catching habits he'd never questioned before. It was exhausting, humbling. Fiona worked quietly, harder than she ever had. She stopped talking in meetings unless she was certain. She double-checked her work, triple-checked her sources. For the first time, she listened more than she spoke. Ryland didn't participate. He was escorted off base before the week ended, his future handed over to processes he could no longer influence. The system he'd believed himself immune to had simply waited until he revealed enough to collapse under his own weight. No one celebrated his removal. They just learned from it. Weeks later, Aurora returned. No fanfare, no announcement. She walked into the same mess hall, same tables, same steel benches. Conversations slowed when she entered, but this time they didn't stop. She took a tray, sat where she pleased. No one mocked her rank. No one questioned her seat. A few nodded, respectful, careful. She ate quietly. When she finished, she stood and left without a word. Because the lesson had already been delivered. Not through punishment, but through example. And as the doors swung shut behind her, one thought lingered in the room, unspoken but shared by everyone who'd witnessed the transformation. Strength isn't proven by how loudly you dominate a space. It's proven by how little noise you need to change it. Why did it feel unfinished, even after everything had been said? The drive out of the base was quiet, too quiet. Aurora sat in the back seat of the unmarked vehicle, watching the perimeter fence slide past the window like a line being erased. She walked away from harder places before. Hotter, louder, places where leaving meant survival. This one was different. This one lingered. The driver didn't speak. He didn't need to. He knew better than to fill space that wasn't empty. The road curved toward the city, dawn washing the horizon in pale gold. Aurora rested her forehead briefly against the glass, feeling the vibration of motion steady her thoughts. She wasn't thinking about Ryland, or Fiona, or the mess hall. She was thinking about the pause. The moment between insult and response, between assumption and truth. That pause had been her weapon, her shield, her flaw. There were times she wondered what her life might have been if she'd spoken earlier. If she'd corrected the record before it hardened into myth. If she'd demanded recognition instead of letting silence carry the load. But then she remembered the cost. Every time she'd spoken too soon, someone had paid for it. The vehicle stopped at a secure airstrip outside the city. Aurora stepped out into cool morning air, the smell of fuel and wet concrete grounding her. A transport plane waited with its ramp lowered. No insignia, no ceremony. Evander stood near the ramp, jacket slung over his shoulder. "You don't have to go straight back in," he said. "There's leave on the table." She shook her head, "Not yet." He studied her for a moment. "You're allowed to rest." She met his eyes. "I know." They shared a look heavy with unspoken understanding. Then he nodded and stepped aside. As the plane lifted, Aurora watched the ground fall away. Cities turned into grids, roads into threads, people into possibility. Time passed differently in the air. She slept lightly, dreamed briefly. Faces surfaced and faded, some she recognized, some she didn't. Voices overlapped, orders without context, apologies that came too late. When the plane landed, it was raining. She walked alone through the terminal, hood up, face unremarkable. That was the point. Outside, she didn't exist. Not really. She blended into crowds and corners, into the soft anonymity of everyday movement. Her phone vibrated once. A message, no sender ID. "You did what needed doing, but you don't have to carry it alone." She stopped under the awning, rain tapping against metal above her. The message disappeared as soon as she read it. She didn't respond. Some truths didn't require acknowledgement to be real. Days later, she stood on a quiet hill overlooking a national cemetery. Rows of white markers stretched out in solemn order, each one equal in silence. Aurora walked slowly, hands in her pockets, stopping when she reached a familiar name. She knelt. No one else was around. Just wind, distant traffic, and the soft rustle of leaves. "I didn't say anything," she murmured, "not when it would have been easier." She traced the edge of the marker with her fingers. "I hope you understand why." The stone didn't answer, but something inside her loosened. Back at the base, the changes continued. Not dramatically, not perfectly, but noticeably. Junior personnel spoke up sooner. Briefings included dissent. Decisions were challenged, not disrespectfully but thoughtfully. The culture shifted by degrees, the way real change always does. Fiona submitted her resignation request 2 months later. She didn't blame anyone, didn't offer excuses. In her exit interview, she said only one thing. "I mistook silence for weakness," she admitted. "I was wrong." Keegan stayed. He struggled, failed a leadership evaluation, retook it, failed again, passed on the third try, not because he became louder or tougher, but because he learned when to step back. Ryland's name quietly vanished from official channels. No explanation, no public reckoning, just absence. The system didn't need spectacle to correct itself. Aurora returned one final time. Not as a commander, not as an inspector, just as herself. She walked into the mess hall, the same one where laughter had once echoed too easily. The room noticed her but didn't freeze. Conversations continued. Chairs scraped softly. Someone nodded. Someone else looked away, not in fear but in thought. She took her tray, sat alone. Halfway through her meal, a young soldier approached, hesitant, nervous. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I just wanted to say thank you." She looked up. "For what?" she asked. He swallowed. "For not yelling, for not making it about you. It made me realize I didn't have to be the loudest to matter." Aurora studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Good." That was all. When she left, the doors closed behind her with a soft finality. Outside, the world moved on. Engines started, radios crackled, life resumed its rhythm. Aurora walked toward the exit, shoulders lighter than they'd been in a long time. She hadn't proven anything. She hadn't needed to. Because dignity doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits. It endures. And when the moment comes, it acts, quietly, decisively, and without asking for permission.